Hollywood, in its golden age, was a city of dreams made visible, where stars ascended from obscurity to godhood, and their mansions stood as temples to that impossible transformation. Behind the wrought iron gates of Benedict Canyon and along the winding curves of Mulholland Drive, estates rose like monuments to immortality itself. Inside, champagne flowed beneath crystal chandeliers, and laughter echoed through marble halls where the most beautiful faces in the world danced until dawn. But Hollywood has always understood that illusion requires control of the image, of the narrative, and especially of the secrets that threatened to shatter the fantasy. When tragedy struck behind those gates, the studio publicity machines roared to life. Suicides became accidental shootings. Scandals were buried beneath layers of carefully crafted press releases. The truth was managed, manipulated, and when necessary, erased entirely. Yet some stories refused to die. In the decades since the Golden Age dimmed, whispers have emerged from these grand estates, stories the studios never controlled, legends that grew in the shadows of Hollywood's carefully curated mythology. Footsteps echo in empty hallways. Figures appear in windows of homes long abandoned. Music drifts from rooms where no one plays. Tonight, we walk through the gates of Hollywood's most secretive mansions, where fame once lived and where some say it still refuses to die. Jean Harlow and Paul Bern House. The cottage at 9820 Easton Drive sits tucked into Benedict Canyon like a secret waiting to be discovered, its stone turret and craftsman beams dating to 1930. Here MGM's platinum blonde Jean Harlow lived briefly with her second husband, producer Paul Bern, before tragedy inscribed itself into every floorboard. On September 5, 1932, Bern was found dead of a gunshot wound in the master bedroom, a death immediately shrouded in MGM's signature combination of speed and spin. Louis B. Mayer himself arrived at the scene before police, orchestrating the narrative of a troubled man's suicide while studio fixers moved through the rooms like ghosts themselves. But the house remembered what the studio wanted Hollywood to forget. In the decades that followed, tenants reported footsteps climbing stairs where no one walked, and a female figure drifting through rooms that should have been empty. In 1970, Sharon Tate described to Fate magazine a terrifying encounter in a Benedict Canyon home connected to the Harlow-Bern circle. She saw what she called a little man and blood staining the staircase, an apparition so vivid she fled the property. Later owners have acknowledged a persistent unease within those walls, a heaviness that no amount of remodeling could lift. The cottage still stands, its turret visible from the winding canyon road below, holding its secrets with the same discretion MGM once demanded of its stars. George Reeves' home. At 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive, the Spanish colonial revival house appears modest by Hollywood standards, its white stucco and red tile roof typical of the era's romantic architecture. But on the night of June 16, 1959, this unassuming home became the site of a death that would haunt Hollywood for generations. George Reeves, the man of steel himself, Superman to millions of children, was found shot to death in his upstairs bedroom. The official verdict came swiftly: suicide. Yet the inconsistencies were immediate and troubling. Witness timelines that didn't align, ballistics that raised questions, and a rush to close the case that seemed almost orchestrated. The controversy never truly ended, and neither, it seems, did Reeves' presence. Almost immediately after his death, reports began to surface of phantom footsteps ascending the staircase to that fatal bedroom, of lights switching on in windows when the house stood empty, of voices murmuring conversations in rooms where no one remained. Subsequent owners and neighbors have repeated these claims across decades, a consistency that lends them a strange weight. The house has changed hands numerous times, but the stories persist with remarkable uniformity. Always the footsteps, always the upstairs bedroom, always the sense of something unfinished. Perhaps what haunts 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive is not a ghost at all, but the unanswered questions themselves, circling endlessly like spirits with nowhere to rest. The Ozzie and Harriet Nelson House. The two-story Spanish colonial at 1822 Camino Palmero Street in Hollywood occupies a unique space in American cultural memory. It was simultaneously a Rayall home and a television set, the actual residence of Ozzie and Harriet Nelson that doubled as their fictional family's house throughout the 1950s and 60s. For over a decade, millions of Americans invited this home into their living rooms each week, watching the Nelson family navigate their wholesome sitcom world against the backdrop of these very rooms, this very staircase, that very backyard. But after the cameras stopped rolling and the Nelsons departed, something else seemed to remain. Multiple owners across the decades have reported the same phenomena: footsteps moving through empty hallways, the faint sound of music drifting from rooms where no radio played, presences that felt oddly benign, almost nostalgic. Real estate agents eventually stopped trying to deny the stories. Some leaned into them, acknowledging the property's haunted reputation as part of its Hollywood pedigree. The experiences were too consistent, reported by too many unconnected residents, to dismiss entirely. What lingers at 1822 Camino Palmero may be less supernatural than is cultural, the ghost of an idealized America that existed only on television, now forever blurred with the actual wood and plaster that housed it. Lucille Ball's Roxbury Drive home. The stately residence at 1000 North Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills was Lucy's sanctuary, the home she cherished through triumph and heartbreak alike. Its backyard famously appeared in a 1955 I Love Lucy episode, cementing the property's place in television history. Here, Lucille Ball lived out her final years, and here, according to local legend, she may have chosen to remain. After her death in 1989, neighbors and passers-by began reporting strange occurrences, the sound of laughter echoing from within when the house stood empty, music that seemed to drift from the upper floors, and most persistently, the figure of a woman glimpsed at an upstairs window. Friends who had known Ball in life claimed the laughter was unmistakably hers, that distinctive, full-throated sound that had made her famous. Some heard it late at night, carrying across Roxbury Drive's manicured lawns with the same exuberance Ball had brought to every performance. The stories accumulated in the manner of Hollywood folklore, passed between neighbors at cocktail parties, whispered by real estate agents showing nearby properties, and eventually collected in the city's growing catalog of celebrity hauntings. Whether Lucy's spirit truly walks those rooms, or whether her legend has simply grown too large to be contained by mortality, 1000 North Roxbury Drive remains a place where the line between the woman and the icon grows beautifully, impossibly thin. Pickfair Estate. At 1143 Summit Drive in Beverly Hills stood Pickfair, the estate that Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks built as the very embodiment of Hollywood royalty. From the 1920s forward, it was known as the White House of Hollywood, a 42-room hunting lodge transformed into a palatial symbol of cinema's aristocracy. Presidents dined there, royalty visited. The guest list read like a catalog of everyone who mattered in the world. Yet, beneath the glamour, staff and family members whispered about the Lady in White, a female figure seen drifting through hallways, particularly in Mary's former suite, accompanied by inexplicable cold spots that would descend without warning. The hauntings became part of Pickfair's lore, passed down through generations of the Fairbanks family, with a mixture of trepidation and pride. Even Mary Pickford herself reportedly acknowledged strange occurrences in her final years at this estate. When later owners undertook extensive renovations in the 1980s and 90s, eventually demolishing much of the original structure, some whispered that the Lady in White was part of the motivation, that the house had become too heavy with its own history, too crowded with memories both seen and unseen. But legends, like Hollywood itself, resist demolition. Even after Pickfair was rebuilt into something new, the stories persist, as if the Lady in White walks not through physical rooms, but through the collective memory of an era that refuses to fade. Rudolph Valentino's Falcon Lair. Falcon Lair sits at 1436 Bella Drive in Benedict Canyon, a Spanish revival masterpiece designed by Wallace Neff in the mid-1920s for cinema's first male sex symbol. Rudolph Valentino purchased the property at the height of his fame, naming it for the falcon that often perched on his arm. Here he retreated from the adoration of millions, and here he kept his beloved Great Dane, Cabber. When Valentino died suddenly in 1926 at only 31, Cabber reportedly mourned himself to death shortly after, and both master and dog were woven into a haunting legend that has persisted for nearly a century. According to local lore, Valentino's apparition has been seen walking the grounds in his signature riding attire, a figure both solid and somehow translucent against the canyon's twilight. Staff members at the property through various ownerships, including later resident Doris Duke, have reported the sensation of being watched and the distinct feeling of a large dog brushing past them in empty hallways. Most peculiarly, visitors to the LA Pet Memorial Park, where Cabber is buried, have claimed to feel what they describe as a phantom lick near the grave, as if the loyal Dane still greets those who remember. Falcon Lair has changed hands many times, but each generation inherits the same stories, the same sense that Valentino's final retreat has become his eternal one. Errol Flynn's Mulholland Farm. High in the Hollywood Hills, along the serpentine path of Mulholland Drive, sat Errol Flynn's notorious bachelor estate, a compound as wild and unruly as the man himself. The swashbuckling star of The Adventures of Robin Hood transformed this property into a playground for Hollywood's darkest indulgences. The parties were legendary, the behavior scandalous, and the secrets buried in its rooms numerous enough to fill volumes the studios would never allow published. Flynn's rape trial in 1942, though he was acquitted, left a stain that never quite washed away from the property's reputation. After Flynn's death in 1959, the house began its slow descent into ruin, but the stories only grew stronger. Author Robert Mattson recounted visiting the property and experiencing an unmistakable presence, a darkness that felt intentional, even malevolent. Actress Tracy Nelson, daughter of Ricky Nelson, shared her own unsettling experiences when she lived there briefly, describing sounds emanating from Flynn's former bedroom that had no earthly source. Former residents have consistently reported the same phenomenon. Whatever energy Flynn brought to his hedonistic gatherings seems to have soaked into the very walls. The ruins of Mulholland Farm now stand as a cautionary monument, a reminder that some homes absorb not just memories, but the very essence of those who lived within them, particularly when that essence was as troubled as Flynn's own. Sharon Tate's Cielo Drive home. The address 10050 Cielo Drive no longer exists. It was deliberately changed to 10,066 after the house was razed in 1994, an attempt to sever the property from its unspeakable history. But on August 9, 1969, this Benedict Canyon estate became the site of the Manson family murders, where Sharon Tate and 4 others lost their lives in an act of violence so senseless it seemed to mark the end of the 1960s dream itself. What's less known is that Tate herself reportedly experienced strange phenomena in the months before her death, glimpsing figures that shouldn't have been there, sensing presences in empty rooms. After the murders, the property became ground zero for Hollywood's darkest legends. The house itself stood until 1994, shunned by many but visited by the morbidly curious. When it was finally demolished, many assumed the hauntings would end, but they merely migrated. David Oman built a home approximately 150 feet from the original site, and he and his guests have reported extensive paranormal activity, apparitions, unexplained sounds, and the overwhelming sensation of grief saturating the property. The land itself seems to remember what happened there, holding on to tragedy the way some materials retain heat. Cielo Drive represents Hollywood's ultimate failure to control the narrative. Here was a horror no publicity machine could spin, no studio could bury, and apparently no demolition could erase. The Houdini Estate. At 2400 Laurel Canyon Boulevard, the ruins known as the Houdini Estate have captured imaginations for generations, though the truth is more complicated than the legend. Harry Houdini never actually owned the Grand Mansion. He rented a nearby cottage and used the surrounding grounds, but Hollywood has never let facts interfere with a ghost haunting. In 1959, a mysterious fire reduced much of the main structure to dramatic stone arches and crumbling staircases, ruins that seemed purpose-built for ghost stories. The timing was almost too perfect, as if the property itself wanted to become a Gothic monument. Since then, the site has become synonymous with seances, shadow figures, and the persistent belief that Houdini's spirit, the man who spent his life debunking spiritualists, might ironically haunt this place. Visitors report cold spots among the ruins, the sensation of being watched from empty doorways, and occasional glimpses of movement where no one stands. The estate's connection to Houdini, however tenuous, has made it a pilgrimage site for those seeking evidence of the afterlife, creating a feedback loop where expectation and experience become impossible to separate. What truly haunts the Houdini estate may be our collective need to believe that even the great skeptic himself couldn't escape the mystery of what comes after. Greystone Mansion. The Tudor Revival Palace at 905 Loma Vista Drive in Beverly Hills stands as one of Hollywood's most magnificent and tragic landmarks. Built in 1928 for oil heir Ned Doheny, the 55-room mansion was meant to be a monument to American wealth and refinement. Instead, on February 16, 1929, just months after its completion, Ned Doheny and his secretary Hugh Plunkett were found dead in a guest bedroom. The official story declared it a murder-suicide, but inconsistencies in the evidence and the family's immense influence over local authorities left the truth forever contested. Today, Greystone serves as a public park and a popular filming location, but staff, docents, and visitors consistently report the same phenomena across decades. Voices echo through the checkered marble halls when no one else is present. The grand staircase, scene of countless movie shoots, emanates inexplicable cold drafts even on warm California days. Security guards have logged numerous incidents they cannot explain, doors opening on their own, the sensation of being followed through empty wings, and shadows that move independently of any light source. The city of Beverly Hills maintains Greystone with meticulous care, preserving every detail of its 1920s grandeur, but they cannot preserve away the questions that linger in its rooms, questions about what really happened that February morning, and whether those who died there have ever truly left. Hollywood built itself on the promise of immortality, that if you were beautiful enough, talented enough, beloved enough, you could transcend death itself. The stars believed it. They constructed palaces to house their eternal fame, estates that would stand as monuments long after their final close-up. But immortality, it turns out, comes in forms they never anticipated. Not in the preservation of their films or the maintenance of their legacies, but in the whispers that outlive even the most carefully managed publicity campaign. The studios understood image control. They could bury a scandal in the morning edition, transform a suicide into an accident by evening, and have the public believing a new narrative by week's end. But they never learned how to silence the stories that emerged after, the footsteps in empty hallways, the laughter from vacant rooms, the figures in windows where no one should stand. These stories existed outside the studio system, beyond the reach of Louis B. Mayer's fixers or Harry Cohn's threats. They belonged to the houses themselves and to the people who lived in them after the stars moved on. Perhaps what we call hauntings are simply Hollywood's truths finally finding their voice, the reality behind the illusion, the tragedy beneath the glamour, the humanity inside the icon. These mansions hold more than ghosts. They hold the unmanaged narrative, the uncensored story, the version of events that no publicity department approved. They remind us that every dream has a shadow, every palace has its dungeons, and every immortal was, in the end, heartbreakingly mortal. In the city of stars, even the dead keep their audience, and behind those old gates, the show perhaps still goes on.